Not too long ago, Donald Trump publicly humiliated Pakistan's leadership, ordering their prime minister to stand up like a student in a classroom. Today, the roles have shifted. Trump is now coordinating with Islamabad to secure a ceasefire he hopes will define his legacy. In a massive diplomatic reversal, Pakistan is currently hosting the Islamabad talks. They've suddenly become the primary mediators, bringing global superpowers together to stop a regional war. The United States, Iran, and 9 European nations have all issued formal statements, expressing gratitude to Islamabad for facilitating these negotiations. But look at who is missing from that table: India. For the last decade, domestic media has relentlessly portrayed the Indian Prime Minister as the world's most dominant global leader. We even saw massive political advertisements claiming the Indian government single-handedly picked up the phone and forced a pause in the war in Ukraine. So, how did a country dealing with severe political fragility and a battered economy pull off this diplomatic coup while entirely sidelining an economic giant right next door? Pakistan utilized its physical position to bridge the gap between a brewing Middle East conflict and key Asian powers, positioning itself as the indispensable fixer for a region on the brink. The architect of this strategy is Pakistan's army chief, Asim Munir. Behind the scenes, he cultivated a tight, personal back-channel rapport directly with the incoming U.S. administration. Trump favors pragmatic negotiators who can bypass ideological delays. Munir presented himself as an operator with the military leverage to guarantee that if a deal was struck, it would actually be enforced. The logistics to make this happen were intense. To ensure safety, Pakistan scrambled its own JF-17 and F-16 fighter jets to provide a security corridor for the Iranian delegation as they arrived in Islamabad. This map shows the hidden architecture of the deal. Because Iran had vowed never to negotiate directly with the U.S., Beijing applied its immense financial and political leverage over Tehran, acting as the silent guarantor that allowed the talks to proceed. The backdoor diplomacy worked. Iran agreed to terms and sent top representatives to the table. Pakistan leveraged its physical space to bypass its economic weaknesses. In a burning crisis, major powers prioritize whoever controls the geographical and diplomatic access points. Pakistan and Iran set an absolute prerequisite for these negotiations. Israel was to be entirely excluded from the room. In a stark departure from standard protocol, the United States agreed. They sat down to negotiate a ceasefire without their closest regional ally anywhere near the building. This created a diplomatic vacuum for India. New Delhi had previously made highly publicized, uncompromising commitments to stand entirely and exclusively with Israel. That absolute alignment narrowed India's options. Once Israel was barred from the Islamabad talks, India was rendered irrelevant to the peace process. India currently chairs the BRICS nations, yet it failed to issue a unified statement or assert any pressure during this crisis. The multilateral strength seen in past summits disappears when a nation's position is too rigid to adapt to new negotiation channels. By prioritizing the domestic optics of standing strong over the necessity of flexible diplomacy, New Delhi allowed Pakistan to outmaneuver them and push 2 massive regional players out of the picture. To understand the gap in resources, look at the math. This chart compares the 2 economies. Pakistan's fragile finances are completely dwarfed by India's $4 trillion industrial machine. Yet, India's foreign policy has increasingly shifted toward generating catchy headlines and securing wins in local state elections, rather than achieving strategic global breakthroughs. New Delhi has a natural advantage. Nearly 10 million Indian citizens live and work in the Middle East. This scale of soft power should guarantee India a leading voice in any regional stability talks. But international trust requires domestic consistency. Aggressive domestic rhetoric and highly publicized actions against minorities have damaged India's leverage with the Islamic nations it needs to partner with abroad. We also see the limits of India's rigid no-talks policy with Islamabad. Refusing to speak to your neighbor loses its effect when the rest of the world decides to fly into their capital anyway. Global leadership requires domestic actions that align with a message of international unity. Without that consistency, the title of world teacher remains a domestic slogan rather than a global reality. Crisis management and high-stakes negotiation remain the primary currencies of global leadership, assets that slogans and PR tours cannot substitute. To be clear, these talks haven't transformed Pakistan into a superpower, but they have successfully reclaimed strategic relevance in a region that India cannot afford to be sidelined from. Understanding global power requires looking past manufactured headlines to see where the actual negotiations are happening. Do you think India's domestic politics are sabotaging its influence on the world stage? Tell us why in the comments below. For more deep dives into the realities of power, like, share, and subscribe to The Explainer.